So we are now live. This is the October 3rd, 2016 meeting of the LTS Working Group for the Node.js project. Today we have myself, Rod Vag, Michael Dawson, Nathan Hammond, and Hannah Wolf present. And Jeremiah has just joined us as well. We have a number of different issues to go over today. We have a meta issue about the messaging regarding dates that we have, and we have a handful of commits to run through, and then some other meta V6 planning to talk about afterwards. To get started, because we have these people who have joined us today, we're going to start talking about updated messaging regarding dates. That would be issue 141 on the tracker. I'm going to just kind of kick off and talk about what drove this. Last week during the CTC meeting, it was decided that we would postpone the end of life date for V010 to the 31st of October. Our messaging was not very clear on that. Specifically, the LTS chart was not updated, nor was there kind of a broadcast about this, and this caused some confusion and miscommunication between teams that were relying on that date for releases. The updated messaging that I have proposed suggests that we do not specify exact dates, but rather months, and that the new contract would be that by the first of the month that we are deprecating or changing between LTS dates, that we will let individuals know, and we will give them no less than 14 days of notice. That's kind of like a really high level attempt to solve this problem. I'm going to just open the floor. We have individuals both who are affected by this and help to make the decisions right now, who could probably talk about this in different ways. Does anyone have something to add?
What was the original issue that the CTC agenda item came from? I think I've lost it now. I might need to. There was like some discussion before that over on the LTS side, wasn't there? That it came to the CTC? I don't remember now.
Rod may know more about that. Rod?
No, look, I don't know if there was an issue that caused this. I think it just came out of discussion, and it was a private issue. It was not a private issue, a non-agenda item that came up and led to some discussion. So there's no formal issue that it came from.
The discussion in the meeting notes implied that there had been communication of a October 31st date in some channels, and that may have confused the situation, and therefore we wanted to ensure that we selected the date that was least impactful, which would be always the later one.
The reason it came up is because those of us who've been doing this work had in our heads that it was the end of October, but we then realized that we had communicated in the LTS repo that it was the 1st of October. So, and we were noticing that people were using that date and talking about that date as the date, and there was a mismatch between what we were working on in our heads and what we had actually written down. But that realization came quite late. That's basically the state of play.
Yeah, and I think it was always the intent that it was sometime in October. It's just that it was written down as a specific date.
Yeah, and I think that's where kind of the problem has stemmed from, is that if we're going to have flexibility, we need to be explicit in the communication, because having a contract of a specific date and not sticking to that is a problem.
So I think if we all understand that, then it's just a question of, you made a proposal for an update. Was there any, I saw the discussion earlier, I didn't see any objections up to the point where I looked at it, that in terms of, being month vague for when is it going to become LTS, and when does it go into maintenance? I think even has that changed, or I guess let's take a look.
So one thing that I think that we can do a good job of expressing that we maybe haven't done the best job at is that this LTS process is malleable. There's definitely been something that we've discussed in these working group meetings, and it's been, I think, suggested at in the CTC meetings, but obviously, we look down, we have 2 viewers right now. There's not, there's not a ton of people who are necessarily privy to these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of making changes as we go along and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And so I think, like, to me, the biggest challenge here is communication, and what communication channels make the most sense to be giving people these updates.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's malleable is the right word. I think the fact is that this is like the first time for so much of this stuff, because we've only got one LTS release right now. Well, version 4 is our new LTS, but we're not even, we're getting through a full year of this now, so we're still experiencing it, we're still ironing out the problems. So the goal is to become much more clear and firm about what we're doing and intentional, but we're still coming up against these things that we didn't expect. And we're still trying to figure that out. But I would expect that next year when we come around to all these dates, that we will have a much more handle on the problems that we're going to encounter and the communication challenges, etc. And so we'll be much better equipped for it. So we're still, it's not that we want it to be malleable so much as we are still trying, we're still learning, and we're still trying to pin down those things that we're realizing need to be pinned down.
Yeah, I guess it's that we do want to be flexible, right? Like, I don't think we need to say it's going to be October 1st next year. We do want to say it's going to be October next year, right?
Yeah.
Hannah, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this matter.
Cool, I'm just sitting quietly because I'm new here and trying to kind of gauge everyone a little bit. My perspective is it doesn't really matter whether the date is narrow or wider. It's that the date is clearly communicated. The date is correct. The date is publicized correctly. And then that there's a little bit of, I kind of want to say marketing, but community management that goes in behind that, so people are aware. And what I would like to see is this being something that is dependable and reliable. It doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be dependable. Otherwise, there's just no way that we can get the wider community to invest in Node as a platform, because it doesn't appear to be reliable. And so my problem comes from there being a bigger reputation issue. And this kind of thing just keeps that going. So in summary, no, it doesn't matter whether you say a month or a day, as long as it's clear, correct, and communicated.
Do you, when you're saying communicated, are there particular channels that other projects use? Is a blog the kind of communication that you'd expect on this? What would be the most useful for you?
Yeah, I think blogging it so that it can be reblogged by sort of the wider network of sort of blogs that handle Node.js news, tweet it, that kind of thing. Nothing more than that, but just put it out there, make people aware that things are changing and that they need to be on their toes.
This is why for my current to end of life, so I specified 4 transitions in my comments on the PR that Miles opened. And those are the transitions that this working group is chartered to make recommendations for. And I my proposal was that any of the transitions that go to end of life can have a fixed date attached to them. And those are the dates that are most likely to have specific plans attached to them, like very specific dates. And so that is a possibly more beneficial for me as a representative of Ember CLI, because if the plans change, we end up having to determine within 14 days which of our 6-week versions will and will not maintain support. And so we will end up picking up additional work right at the very end, possibly, of a release cycle. And so that's less than ideal.
So
I can reiterate that end of life really needs, it would be preferable if there was a specific date so that we can be prepared for it.
And I think I heard the concern is that you don't want them to get extended out because that's then more work for you.
It's more work and it just looks sloppy.
Well,
Yeah, no,
there's no reason that we can't pin those down. Like the transition ones are a little bit more complicated, but end of life is like, that's something that doesn't really depend on many other things. In fact, it hardly depends on anything. So we can pin that down ahead of time. In fact, there's no reason we couldn't have just said, okay, 1st of October is it.
Yeah.
Like we could have just made that call. Nothing would have been changed on our end. It's just that there was a mismatch in our own expectations. So I think we can pin that down way ahead of time and stick to it as long as we're explicit about it now and say this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I wanted to understand. I agree that we should pin those down. And I also want to understand that, from our perspective, if we decided to extend it a couple weeks, we might have thought, well, that's good for the community, but it almost sounds like that's not necessarily the case, because then there's a knock-on for everybody else who's got to scramble to handle that, right? So is that what I heard, that like you guys would prefer we pick it and it just dies at that date, and there'd have to be a really, really good reason for it to be extended?
Absolutely. I mean, to put a fine point on it, we did thousands of pounds worth of work to prepare for the LTS that we now didn't need to do.
Or in another way of phrasing it, if we continually extend this behavior, it becomes kind of addict-like. Oh, just another hit.
Well, no, sure. I multiple times is even worse. I was just thinking, like, we should probably like make it clear somewhere in our docs that we don't want to extend for these particular reasons, right? Because it can seem like an innocuous thing to do, but not really.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same thing as what you're saying about transitions being hard to pin down. Transitions are hard to pin down because you don't know when things are going to land. Equally, if you're a project like Ghost and you're trying to prepare yourself for a node change, and ideally, and I think Ember is looking to do the same thing, ideally we want to be able to ship a release which is nothing but that change, that singular change, because it's so, particularly with the 0.10 end of life, it's so fundamental. And so in order to do that, we have to have released master in time for the end of life to happen. And if we don't do it on time, we get a ton of people coming along to GitHub moaning at us why we haven't done it yet. And that's equally, a bunch of triaging and handling, that kind of stuff. So there's just a whole bunch of stuff around the process of shipping a new release and of node updating itself that just, contribute towards workload for projects like ours that are dependent on what you guys are doing.
Right, and you guys actually do work specifically to get, like, in that case, you're like getting rid of 10. You support multiple versions, and then in that case, you're dropping 10 as one of those supported versions, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We actively adopted, so we had 3 PRs lined up to improve the situation for Ember CLI that were planned to go in particular releases. And those are already all queued up and ready to go. We waited until October 2nd to make sure that there weren't second thoughts. And then we shipped and then noticed that actually there were changes made on October 2nd.
Right, yeah, you don't, okay. So, and you guys don't want to drop, like, I think in like, say, end user applications, we're sort of expecting them to have upgraded long before the end of life. And so the end of life should really be a non-event. But I can see in your cases, that's not the case at all. It's like, okay, you want to support it until you don't have to. And so there is a distinct dependency.
It's not just a case of wanting to. From my perspective, the thing that I've been advocating is that projects like Ember and like Ghost shouldn't drop support until the day that you drop support, because
Right, okay.
that builds a reputation for the end of life date being the end of life date. And the more of the ecosystem that adopts that same pattern, the more trustworthy that date becomes, the
Right.
more impact it has, the better it is for the whole community.
And the more rapidly the entire community moves forward.
Right, because it's
Yeah,
not a
and
case of it being wishy-washy anymore.
And it strengthens our messaging. Just for as another data point, we have a lot of pressure on us at the moment as well to keep 010 support going. I don't know if you've noticed any of that out there, but there's a lot of people that would like to see 010 continue on for a lot longer.
Lori Voss, for example.
Well, Laurie's just one of them, but yeah.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people out there that put that kind of pressure on us. So we've got pressure coming from multiple directions. But having folks like you along with in the journey does strengthen our case, so that we're all in lockstep. And so that is something that we do want, and we want to make sure that we're serving you as downstream users so that you can then strengthen our case. So I think we're all on the same page here. We just got to get the processes right.
I mean, that's fundamentally the point as well. None of us want to be keeping old software lying around. That's not what anyone wants. However, enterprise and big business, they require a certain amount of maintenance. And by setting a date and sticking to it, you can drive that message home that end of life is end of life, and that, sysadmins have to update when the end of life comes, and they're used to that kind of behavior from, all of the Linux ecosystem. And so if you stick to that same pattern, everyone will eventually get on board. I believe, anyway.
I do have one question. Nathan, you say one of your 4 transition points mentions current to end of life. How important to you is the end of life for current branches that don't go into LTS?
On the Ember side, we don't particularly care. We don't target any features to any of your unstable branches. So it doesn't impact us, but it does help us plan for when we make testing changes. So that has more to do with our infrastructure that we've built that supports our testing environment.
What do you mean by unstable branches?
5x, 3x, etc. I thought, or I'm not sure if you call them stable, unstable, or if they're just current, like odd and even.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly.
Yes, sorry, I was not entirely clear. I'm not perfect on your terminology.
Yeah, it's okay.
The terminology is somewhat confusing, which is also why that has changed in the past. So I think looking at this, that we have some clear actions. I think the primary change to that pull request would be having explicit end-of-life dates. And is anyone opposed to that idea? Okay, I'll take that silent.
And we want to be that they are, like, it should be something really, really exceptional for that to change.
Mm-hmm. We should probably I'll document that, and then we can offline just discuss the language there and making sure that we have something that makes sense.
Because I think adding in like some of the rationale that we've just discussed today is good, because I think that helps that if somebody's coming to it fresh, they'll quickly say, yeah, okay, I understand why you push it out a week or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's good. I mean, like 010 and 012 are special cases that didn't exactly follow the LTS process. So there's a part of me that's glad that we're kind of like getting the opportunity here to find what isn't working. And you know, when we get there with V4, we'll have a clear path forward. So I think we're ready to move on to the next issues. Hannah and Nathan, feel free to drop off if you're not interested in this stuff, but you're also more than welcome to stay on and in the future to join us if you know this work is important to you and you want to be involved. We're more than happy to have more people helping out. So we have three. We have a couple pull requests to discuss that we want to just decide whether or not they're going to be backported to version 4. So the first one, Fedor was supposed to be here, but he hasn't shown up. It's a Semver minor, TLS introducing secure context for TLS Connect. So in particular, it's important to PayPal. It saves lots of CPU and memory. Was the main point that Fedor put up. Chalker suggested that it was a clean and purely additive change, and he was in support of the Semver minor. And we've had, you know, other people chime in stating that this is important for TLS performance. Is there anyone that's on the call right now that has some good insight into this change in particular?
I don't, but I feel like this is replacing something else that got deprecated, but I don't remember when that got deprecated.
So it specifically adds secure context option to TLS Connect. It's useful for caching client certificates, key, and CA certificates.
Oh, right, it's that one. Yeah, that should be just additive. On a question of additive changes, I think it might be better first to consider. No, I don't know exactly when it is, but like, how many months are we out for maintenance on V4? Like, how much do we want to do minors on it, depending on how close we are?
So we're 6 months out of moving to maintenance. I was imagining that aside from security stuff, that we would probably do at most one more minor, if even that. So there's this one and two more to bring up as part of this issue, and I don't know if there's any other minors that are staged right now because we've gone through most of them.
I mean, I think I would be okay with it. What do other people think? Like in particular, I think the configure shared option is probably pretty useful. Although that's also, I mean, that's mostly just backporting it onto like the repo, not well, I guess you can get it in the tarballs too. So
yeah. So for me on the secure context stuff, yeah, it's purely additive. To me, it's just, you know, like exposing things that are under the hood that, you know, this was landed in 5.3. So like, you know, we're talking about something that's been on the code base for 9 months now. I don't really see a lot of risk in adding it, and it's been made pretty clear that, you know, at the very least, PayPal sees financial like
Yeah.
benefit in doing it. So I see very little reason to not move it forward.
Yeah, I'd agree. We have a strong requester. We allow minors, and we're still 6 months out. So,
And if you have a look at the actual change, it is really minor. There's very little risk involved in this one.
Exactly.
Okay, so is everyone okay with me moving this to LTS Watch?
Yes.
yep.
Do it.
Okay, excellent. So we've moved that. Fedor is going to be super excited, and I will update that thread. So the next one, you know, this one's again additive. I'm not particularly sold on that we need it or don't need it, but it just seemed like it wasn't going to be such a big deal to add it if we wanted to. HTTP 451 status code unavailable for legal reasons. This just adds a new status code to the server. and adds that to our test to make sure. This is just informative. You know, this is a status code that's in the standard. I see no reason why not to upgrade that. I wouldn't make a minor release just for this, but if we're going to have the minor release for other stuff, it seems like something that we could add without really any pain.
Is somebody asking for it, or?
This was actually just me auditing and going through things that were in the backlog and finding stuff that hadn't been moved.
To be clear, I think the HTTP parser can parse this code anyways, or does this allow it to be used in HTTP? I'm not sure if this just exposes it, or if this means like without this you actually can't use this or parse that status code.
I think it just exports the status code so that it can be referred to.
I mean, that's what I'm thinking too, but I don't know for sure. Because in terms of like exported status codes, like there's a lot of modules that use an external npm module for that.
Mm-hmm. So the only place where it's used in the code is in the write head, where the status message is derived from that. If there's a status code, this is just a lookup table to get the message for it.
Right. So somebody sends back. You can still send a 451. You just won't get a message.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. This is very minor, but if we're doing a Semver minor anyway, then may as well throw it in.
Sure.
Okay.
Again, the risk here is basically non-existent. So.
Yeah, I don't see there's any great motivation to do it, but then again, no major reason to object either. So.
Yeah, that was mostly my thought. I was just going through all the stuff that hadn't been audited, and this just stuck out as like, you know, a nice to have. But I actually had not brought it up in a meeting until we actually had other things that were meaningful. Okay, so the last one that we have here, number 6994. Build, introduce, configure, shared. So it's a continuation of another PR, 5918, which has some more information in there. But it exposes a new shared configuration flag to allow Node to be built as a shared library. Specifically also uses the no bundled V8 to not include V8 and no V8 platform to avoid that. It just makes it easier for individuals who want to build it with shared binaries to do so. This to me seems like something that would be good to have on V4. It seems like the kind of thing that could help, you know, distributions or individuals who are trying to package Node that may have requirements that involve it being used as a shared library. This could just get rid of a whole bunch of monkey patching. And I'll just kind of leave this to the floor. What are people's thoughts on this?
I know that we are, you know, floating this equivalent or this patch or equivalent in our internal 4.x, so it's useful for us as a data point.
What are you using shared for? Because like shared is usually used for like embedders, and those tend to be stuff like Electron, and those tend to use like something like Chromium, which usually requires like a later V8 or a more updated V8.
Yeah.
So,
no, we have a product that wants to include Node as a shared library as opposed to a separate exe.
Okay.
Right, because they do the same thing for other languages. So that, like Java has a shared library you can load into process, and
right.
We want to load them all into the same one and support the different languages.
Can anyone say what version of Node we've been shipping this since? I can't see that just quickly.
Somewhere in V6, I believe.
6.3. So we've been shipping this since July 5th.
Okay, because this one's not entirely risk-free, but as long as it's had broad distribution for a good time, then it's fine by me.
It's cool. There's a fairly large potential, I would say, that this doesn't align cleanly, so we might need a special backport of it anyways, I would think.
It sounds like if IBM's internally floating this on 4, maybe Michael could help
That's true.
with
Yeah.
whatever we're already using.
I mean, that's like a good case, a good reason for us to like be able to pull it in anyway if someone needs to float it, right?
Okay, so
particularly if it's actually in use in that form. So if somebody's actually using it against V4 right now successfully, then that's great.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where we're. Yeah, I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure like they're definitely using it on 4, and I just have to check that it's exactly this patch. But I think it should be so.
okay, excellent. So I'll move forward with that, and then I'll just one thing that is very good to make clear. For the miners that we've done before in the past, we did an RC process that went for a month. So when we eventually do look into getting this in there, we will have an RC out there for an extended period of time to make sure that the breakages are kept minimal. Okay, so that is the end of the issues. So I have some additional items to discuss. The first was our version 6 LTS planning. We had briefly discussed this in the CTC meeting last week, but a few questions that I'd like to float is, like who will be taking the lead? I've been doing a lot of the backporting for V4, and I've kind of made the call a couple times of like, who's gonna help out with V6 or what processes can we change? And that leads into the next one is like how to better automate the process. To kind of talk to that point, we've been talking about using the GitHub bot to test to see if things will rebase onto specific release streams and add tags so that we can know what lands cleanly and what doesn't, and that will like significantly improve the audit process. And then we also wanted to talk about the specific date of moving to LTS, which right now is scheduled for a week before the V7 bump. But so, we kind of have the same people who have been here for the most part, and I'm going to make the assumption that Hannah and Nathan are not looking to take on lots of work in the next month. But does anyone have any thoughts on other people who could be involved in this or kind of distributing the load a little bit?
Evan Lucas said in the CTC meeting that he was interested in helping out. He's obviously not able to join us today, but he's a candidate as well.
Yeah, I'm exploring if I could get Gibson involved.
Excellent.
But it's still at the exploratory stage.
And then I guess like this is an interesting question to pose. Like I found for myself that there were a lot of benefits in kind of being an individual on this and having the flexibility with like the staging branch, for example, and like having someone who knows what's living on there just makes it way easier to get things done when it comes to the release. But at the same time, do you think it might be something that we can work into our review process that we can distribute across the whole team and not have it be, a single person who's overlooking this?
I'll just say that I think that the way it's worked with version 4 has been great. The way you've managed it has been fantastic. But I really want us to try and minimize our single points of failure. So we have to find a way to make it reproducible by more than one person.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my strong preference. So even if somebody does put up their hand, we should be working towards what are the processes and the tooling that we can use to make this so that if that person was sick for an extended period of time, then someone else could pick it up pretty easily. Or if they disappeared or changed employment. Because the other thing is that this is very likely to be handled by somebody from a company that is tasked with this role. And that means that person is at the whim of that company. If that company decides to reallocate resources, then, or that person moves on from the company, then we've got a ball that's been dropped.
Yeah. We've been really lucky that IBM has pretty much let me go at this. So we can't necessarily bank on having that luck for 10 years.
Yeah.
So what I think we can do is if we do get one individual or two putting up their hands saying we'd like to help out with this version 6 thing, then they can work with you on documenting the processes and figuring out tooling and open processes that can help us to make this more reproducible. So let's make this okay, we've got 2 of them now. Let's make it a discussion and figure out how to do it.
That sounds like a great idea. And maybe we could even break that down into like a subcommittee. Not to get too bureaucratic about it, but something where there's like kind of an expectation of reporting during the LTS working group meetings of like the updated status of what's going on there.
The other thing too is like if we understood like where is the real work, we can then look at, well, I think it was a really good level of service in terms of like pretty much everything would almost automatically get backported. But you could imagine an approach where, if you create a PR and you care whether it gets backported or not, would have a lot more influence, right?
So we kind of did that. So like James was very active on the backporting early on, and then kind of took a step back and was like, well, let's just not do it and see what happens.
Yep.
And nothing happened. Literally, like no one was putting the labels and things were not getting backported. And I've got the process down now to like where I'm using branch diff and I'm just auditing the backlog and labeling things and pinging people. And it is definitely not the most efficient way to do it. If we were more on top of it, that's like where I was thinking about the automation of automatically adding labels would probably help. But yeah, there's definitely a better way to do this. As it is right now, you can audit a backlog of a month in about a day or two. But that's also not going to scale. Even just in the last 3 months, there's been so much more activity on the repo that the backlog has been getting bigger and bigger, and it's harder and harder to keep up with. So I do think this needs to become part of our everyday release process. And the other thing that I've been thinking quite a lot too is, we added the staging branch to current now. Maybe we need to be thinking of our release process as cascading and less as like it goes into this current release and then it is kind of cascading, but we're not like it's more of kind of like it has to be elected. It's not like automatically a candidate. So like maybe everything should be backported until it's said not to. And it should be, the responsibility could be distributed. But yeah, maybe we should talk more about that offline.
I'm almost going the other way though, that you could basically, like if you wanted to cut down work, you'd say, well, we won't put backport anything unless somebody's basically saying this should be backported. And then you say, well, okay, if you think this should be backported, you landed in staging. Right, and then so that should cut down you still want somebody who knows what's going on and what's going in, but the amount of activity would be less, so it would be less overall work, right?
This is the approach that we take in Ember. If you want something to go into a previous release or into something that has or a ship that has already sailed because we have a release train model, you must manually tag it and target the correct branch, and you are responsible for every single portion of that process.
Interesting. So I feel like that sort of process like already happens for maintenance branches. Like that's really a case of, okay, either it's a security fix or someone really needs whatever fix into it. And like current's like very much the opposite. Like current is designed to pick up pretty much everything that isn't major or depends on a major. And it has sort of been that way from the start. So the question is like, what do we do with the LTS, which is sort of like in between those two, right?
Right.
If we leave it to people, it just won't happen. And the reality is that we're going to miss stuff. And like through doing the audits, there's a non-insignificant number of changes and little fixes that are important that would have gotten missed. And I would say throughout the whole process, less than 10% of those changes, potentially even less than 5%, are ones that people explicitly were like, we want this backported. And perhaps that's, even just maybe the way in which we've handled it has enabled it to be that way. But at the same time, you know, we've ended up with a very stable branch, and we've ended up with a branch that has minimized the delta and made it easier to backport larger things when it's been necessary.
Right. On automation, I think I could probably get the bot to check if like it can rebase onto it cleanly. Pretty easy, but the tricky part is how do you tell if some pull request or commit depends on another pull request or commit that has either merge conflicts or hasn't landed? Yeah, like
But-
I think it'll get a little bit tricky there because there will be stuff that like it would tag otherwise that like this is stuff you could land, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we even need to worry about those edge cases to begin with. I mean,
Okay.
so like the last time I went through and did the audit, there were 300 commits that had not been labeled in any way for LTS. I would say probably half of those just land and could have just been automatically labeled as LTS watch. And like one thing that does happen a lot is if something's labeled LTS and it shouldn't be, people are pretty quick to unlabel it and label it as don't land.
Right.
So,
okay. So I see what you're saying. I think yeah, that would work a lot easier. Is to have the bot label stuff for LTS rather than label what can't land on it. That makes more sense. That should be a lot easier.
yeah. I was figuring that would be easy enough to roll out and would have it would make a difference. And then we could figure out better ways moving forward. But I think that by itself would just make a huge difference.
Okay. I can probably look into how to do that in like the next week or two.
Okay, excellent. And if you could even just point me in the right direction, I could maybe play around with it too.
Yeah.
Okay, so to follow up, it seems like we have some good ideas on moving forward with LTS. No problems with the current date that we have. The next thing we had on here was V0, 10, and 12 end of life. So we discussed most of this earlier, but I just wanted to confirm with everyone and just like make sure everyone's on the same page. You know, if we go to the website right now and we look at the LTS chart, we are saying the 31st of October and the 31st of December for 010 and 012. Are we all on the same page about that and we're not planning any changes?
Have we already updated it to that?
Yes, that got updated.
Okay.
Is OpenSSL end of life for 1.0.1 the 31st of October, December, or some other date?
I believe it's end of year, yes. So
Okay.
I'm just looking that up right now to see if I can see anything. They've got a new release strategy article from a couple years ago.
So there is something that's just worth mentioning here, just so everyone knows. Linux distributions that have long support life cycles, particularly CentOS and Red Hat, the whole Red Hat ecosystem, they support stuff well beyond its upstream life anyway. OpenSSL is a particularly interesting case here because it's going to go end of life at the end of this year, but CentOS has been shipping old OpenSSLs for a long time, and they're like CentOS 5 is going to be supported till 2020. So they take on the maintenance burden of that, and the OpenSSL team are like, no, like they throw their hands up and say, no, this is not ours anymore. If you're going to ship this thing, you're responsible for it. So those distributions take on that responsibility. We're going to see that with Node as well, 0.10, particularly in Debian Wheezy. So its support lifetime is longer than ours. It's going to continue supporting 0.10, and I'm pretty sure there's no way we're going to get them to upgrade that. It just doesn't match their shipping model. So they, just like OpenSSL and other things, they take on that responsibility for shipping that. I know that this is one data point that people are shouting at us about. Oh, it's going to, you're going to, Wheezy is still shipping 0.10 and you're not supporting it anymore. This is just something that happens, and we can't afford to support things till 2020 and other ridiculous timeframes. We have to be more realistic, and those projects that want to, the distributions that want to have extended time frames, are already taking on that burden. That's an expectation they have. And as long as we communicate that ahead of time, they know how to plan for that.
I don't think we have time for that today, but in the future, I would like to revisit the discussion about Debian, and at the very least, how we can maybe more align on the releases. But we have 10 minutes left. We're not going to get into that.
I've got a quick question, if that's okay.
Pardon?
Got a quick question about
Absolutely.
the 31st of December date. Is that realistic? Because it's a Saturday, and it's between the Christmas holiday and the New Year holiday. Is there really going to be whatever communication needs to be done around that? I mean, it doesn't really, an end of life doesn't really require any work, I don't think, but it does require somebody to be around to push buttons on blog posts and stuff. And so if that's unrealistic, perhaps you should set it to a date that's more realistic anyway.
Well, couldn't you send those out in advance and say, you know, the last working day before then, send out the blog post that says, oh yeah, as a reminder, this date is going to happen in the next few days. Like as you said, nothing really has to happen on that day. It's just a reminder for people. And in theory, they better have done all the work beforehand because it's too late.
There'll be people around. There are those of us that just can't leave things alone, even on holidays. So it'll happen.
I guess like maybe the interesting question here to think about though is for other organizations who have to plan things around this, who may want to do or have larger commitments based around this, that maybe doing it on a business day that gives them more time to deal with it maybe better. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Hannah?
I wasn't trying to be that I don't know, particular about it. I'm the same as I think a lot of people here. I don't really leave things alone, but I think realistically, for anybody else, especially anyone that's an like a 9-to-5 organization, having to do any sort of stuff over the weekend is just a little bit weird. So perhaps it should be set to a business day, but that's not my necessarily.
The thing we're bumping up against here is actually the marketing costs. So if we don't have like at the moment, we can just say end of the year. That's really easy to grok. People can listen to that and remember that. If we have some weird date, like the 27th of December or the 3rd of January, it becomes a little bit more difficult to keep in your head and communicate. And you have to explain, well, why is it not the end of the year? So I think that's the main cost of not doing it on that end of year boundary. For things that require action, then sure, that's a good thing to consider. But I think in this case, the ease of communication probably outweighs the cost here.
I think it's worth mentioning too, this is a special case. Every other end of life will be in April. So this will be the only time we're going to have an end of life in December. And I think I do kind of like agree that having it just be the end of the year is easy to remember. But yeah, at the same time, it totally makes sense that doing it on a Saturday is less than ideal.
Should have just killed it the same time as 0.10.
Yeah, but then, yeah, we had that discussion. The 0.10 we wanted to continue until the end. No, sorry, it was 0.12 we wanted to continue until April. That was the original intention. It's just that OpenSSL stymied that for us. So we did want to have that 6-month difference between 0.10 and 0.12. That got compacted by OpenSSL.
So do you think that it may make sense to just ping our marketing team and see what they'd prefer on that? Or do you want to just stick with what we have and call it a day? And I mean, there's a part of me also that's just kind of feeling like after having switched the dates, I don't really want to switch things again. I'd rather just stick to what we have on the table.
Yeah, that's why I was asking. Like, if we hadn't switched them, I would have just left them at the first. But since we've already switched them, I think it sort of looked like you're being wishy-washy if we then change them again, right?
At this point, I believe we should stick with the dates as published and deal with the costs for this one-time situation. especially since we already have things in motion. I know at other companies who have to get off of old C extension things. So sticking with the same dates seems good to me.
Yeah. But we'll, as we do it in the future, that is a good point to factor in. And I'd be like, you know, a Monday is better than a Friday too, and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of things happening on Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday doesn't seem like a bad day at all.
But maybe what we can do is we have that pull request that I have in that's discussing the end, that's like talking about changing the calendar for future dates that are quite a bit off. And I will go through and look at calendars and pick days that are more reasonable as part of that, you know, part of that proposal.
Okay.
Okay, so the last order of business for today is our version 4 release schedule.
Before we get onto that, I don't think we really finished for V6, like about the when we're actually cutting it. Are we actually cutting it a week ahead of, or planning to cut it a week ahead of V7? That would target it for October the 18th.
That was where we landed after the CTC meeting. I had talked to James about it, who wasn't opposed to it. I think James at first was expecting that everything would kind of flip on the same day. To me, having the week in between the LTS switch and the version 7 just kind of seemed like we could focus our energies on one and then the other. But
Yeah.
perhaps from a messaging standpoint, it's better to have them together. You know, I'm going to call to Nathan and Hannah again, because you know we're all kind of in here always thinking within this box. For yourselves and your organizations, would you prefer to have that week in between, or would you prefer everything to kind of come at once?
This is the week in between V6 going LTS and a new major being cut.
Ghost only supports LTS versions of Node, so it makes very little difference to us.
Well, this is when the LTS starts, so it impacts on that date.
But it doesn't. It means that doing them together doesn't matter necessarily.
Yeah, as long as I know what day I've got to do the changeover in Ghost. It's easy.
It doesn't impact us for Ember CLI either. We will just defer to whatever that date is, as long as we know the date. It doesn't really change because we're already testing against betas and everything else. So we should, like, again, already be in place in advance. And if we're not, it's our fault. So
for node source, we have product work that depends on the LTS switch, and this is very attractive to node source internally. And to me personally as well, the idea of separating them out so that we can do communication efforts separately. And talk about things, to actually divide them out, and instead of having this big bucket of concerns that we go out there and talk about, actually having these discrete things that we can pinpoint and say, this is happening, this is what it means, and then this is happening, this is what it means. So I'm very much in favor of this. Internally at Node Source, the signal I'm getting is that others are very much in favor of it as well. And so excellent. With us not particularly caring, it seems like that may be the concern that carries the day.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard any objections either, which is interesting here.
Yeah, no,
so
no one's had. Yeah. Okay, so excellent. Jeremiah, was there anything else on V6 that you think that we missed for right now?
Nope.
Okay, so version 4 release schedule. I'd like to pick some dates for the next patch and the next minor. So, you know, I was thinking about trying to get a release candidate out this week for the next patch, with a tentative release of perhaps the 18th is something that I'm thinking about, with a release candidate for the next minor coming soon after, and having a 1 month RC cycle. Do people have any concerns about that, or any specific dates that they have in mind, or should I just propose some dates and we can vote about it in an issue?
I think on my end, having to like write blog posts and stuff on this sort of thing. It would be easier if it was not on the major or the LTS day.
Okay.
Even if it
would
was
be
in
nice.
one of
It would
those
be nice
weeks.
if it was separate. Yeah. Yeah, just to make it would make it much simpler to be able to separate what's going on.
Okay, so how about, you know what? Why don't? Well, let me think about this, and I'll come with a proposal, because the backlog has gotten pretty big due to the OpenSSL stuff. So I'd like to try to get stuff up sooner than later, but at the same time, like, to do any sort of RC, we're going to overlap with both of those. So maybe it might make sense to just put together a minor RC next week, and then run a 1 month RC on that, and just do a minor bump November 1st.
What about tomorrow?
For what, a release or for an RC?
For an RC to start the process.
Yeah, I can definitely get that. But if we do like a 2-week RC, then we're releasing on the 18th, which is the same day as the LTS.
I mean, like, even if you target like Wednesday instead, it's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I do like the idea of still sticking to Tuesday when we can, just having having that consistency in day.
Yeah.
I think is really positive. If we can manage it, then that's fine.
Hey, Jeremiah, what I can suggest, if you're interested in it, so for a patch, I'd like to do a 2-week RC, and for a minor, I want to do a 1 month RC. Do you want to just look at your schedule and like pick some dates that make sense for you, and then we can just discuss that afterwards? And we don't need to do this right now. We can do this offline. I'm hoping to have things prepped and to get through the backlog tomorrow, so that we'd have everything we need to put something together.
Yeah. I think it's really only gonna be those two that, like, I would really prefer to like focus messaging on like V6 and then V7, and not have like another release on the same day if possible.
Okay, no problem. So let me think on this, and then I'll make an issue today or tomorrow that will just suggest some dates, and then we can vote about that offline. Okay. So we are at 5:02 right now. We have run over the hour. I'm just gonna quickly see, does anyone else have anything else that they'd like to talk about? Okay, excellent. Thank you all so much for finding the time today. I really appreciate everyone who joined the call. The issue, if there's anything else that you'd like to bring up, please feel free to drop it in the issue or to open another issue. For our viewer who's been watching, thank you for watching. And other than that, have a really great day.
Okay.